Hello and welcome to the CDO Magazine interview series. I am Leonard Maganza with Cinity, and we are partnering with CDO Magazine, MIT CDO IQ, and the International Society of Chief Data Officers. I know that's a mouthful, but today I have the pleasure of talking with Vimal Kohli, the VP and Head of Data Science and Analytics at Gap Inc. Vimal, I'm sure many people do not realize actually how broad Gap Inc. is. They right away, their mind goes to the Gap brand, which is a great brand, but very diverse and therefore very global, I'm sure, right? Compounded by, all those great franchises. But anyway, one of the things that we were wondering and talking about before we joined the call, how would you define your role of a global, data and analytics leader? Do you think it's more where about the data is located? I mean, data residency is, a hot topic nowadays. Or do you think it's more about where the customers and the employees and the supply chain and the manufacturing or the operations are located? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, thank you, Leonard. Thank you for having me firstly. And thank you for that tee up. You're right. A lot of people think about Gap Inc. and they think about only one of our four brands. And of course, Gap is one of our brands. It's an iconic brand with a very rich and long heritage and history. But we have three other brands. We have Old Navy, we have Banana Republic, and we have Athleta and Gap, of course. So the four of them together is Gap Inc. I think that's a great question. I actually have, a slightly different point of view on that. I think it's actually about none of those things because I fundamentally think, Leonard, the bigger challenges, you might have often heard people say this, that a lot of companies will say that the cliche is they're data rich, but insights poor. Yeah. I think it's that. And I always joke, back in the day, if you wind back the clock before the advent of big data, one of the biggest complaints in the business we used to have was we don't have enough data. And now it's the reverse. The complaint is we have too much data, and it's like drinking from a fire hose and not drowning, right? So I think really the role of the chief data officer really becomes critical here because it is our job to make sure that the organization has the ability and the ecosystem and the processes to turn data into insights and insights into actions and strategy. Because otherwise, it just becomes an overhead, it becomes a nice to have, and there isn't really any ROI from your data investments.
Yeah, interesting. That's interesting perspective. When I think about that, I'm going to ask you in a minute just to compare what you think the role, of a global leader versus a regional leader are, and what some of the differences are. I'll just speak from my own experience. Cindy, who I work for, is a global data company as well, as I like to say, in the data business since before data was cool. You talked about rolling the clock back, but one of the things, as I think back, I was resourcing a team one time, and we were running a project in one country, and I was about to go to another country, and I said, and they were both in the same part of the world. And I said, well, I'll just move that team. And everybody reacted. I'm not mentioning the countries because not realizing they had been warring for years. I was thinking very tactically, but not at all culturally. I mean, you talk about insights. That's one of the things that kind of bounces around in my head. So I'm curious what your view is about what the difference is and the different concerns you have to consider when you're thinking a global view of managing analytics versus a regional one.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And I think you said it right. I mean, that example certainly resonates with me. And I'll also date myself. I've been in this space a very long time. So I've been, I was fortunate to get into the data science and analytics space almost 20 years ago when the field was very new. And that certainly has been the evolution. So I've experienced that. I would answer your question in two ways, Leonard. One is from the customer's perspective and second is from the team. From a customer standpoint, again, if you go back to what I said, fundamentally it's about finding those nuggets and insights in the data, right? And one of the ways we do that is by taking a hypothesis-led approach. And most hypotheses about the customer will come from our personal experience, right? Because that's where intuition comes from our personal experience. Like in the retail apparel business, that's what we think. We are all customers. We shop for ourselves. We shop for our family, kids, wives. When you go regional to global, that becomes a little challenging because you may, as an individual in the business, you may or may not have exposure to those different cultural and regional nuances. And of course, across the world, those things are different. But I would argue to some extent when it comes to fashion, even within the country, they're different, right? So what's considered upscale and hip and new fashion I spent the last 10 years in Central Ohio. What may be considered upscale and new there may or may not be considered new and fashionable in downtown LA, right? And that's reflective if anyone's ever shopped in any of the apparel stores and you travel across the country, you'll see differences in the product in those stores. That's localized assortment, right? So I think that's definitely one part of it. And I think the other part, as you said it absolutely right, is we lead teams that are global, that are located across the world. And again, there are differences in cultural nuances in things like, and it's simple things. We don't even think about it. Things like what is the cultural norm around not being in the office beyond 5 o'clock versus having a Zoom meeting at 7:30 in the morning. Those are two very different things, based on where you are. And how do you think about a long holiday weekend and giving an extra day off versus scheduling a meeting there? Again, it of course differs across the world, but it differs within the same country. Like out here in the Bay Area, the kind of fall activities could be very different from. I remember a friend of mine, they have a large setup here in Silicon Valley, and they also have a large setup in Michigan. They said they were surprised to realize that one of the considerations the Michigan office is hunting season. Hunting season. I come from Ohio, so I'm familiar with that. Is pretty short actually. It's only 4 weeks. So if you're going to give people some time off, better do it in that period because they can take it.
Yeah, that's interesting. So you talked about some of your analytics being hypothesis based. I'm going to make a hypothesis now. I'm going to ask you a question in a minute about what do you enjoy most about having a global role? I think about myself having a global role. I used to fly around the world, taste food around the world, and all that kind of got deflated. But some of that, in a practical way, you still engage many cultures and the like. But I'm just curious what you enjoy about that role.
Yeah, I think to some extent goes back to what I was saying earlier, which is that there are certain values and beliefs in shopper behaviors that customers exhibit the same way, regardless of where they live. On the other hand, the manifestation of those things is very different. So I'll take ourselves as an example. Old Navy is one of our brands, right? And we're based on democracy of style is the mantra, right? So we're a value brand. Value is value. Customers across the world, regardless of their demographic, regardless of their income, regardless of where they live, every customer wants value. What value specifically means, though, can mean something very different. It's not always about, it's actually usually never about the lowest price. It's about what the customer equates in their mind as a fair price for the service they're getting from the brand or the product, right? So that's the two sides of the value equation. And to me, it's fascinating in a global mindset to see how those things differ across the globe. Right?
Was that the indirect way of you telling me I'm not getting a coupon at the end of this?
I will personally send you a coupon and give some great product for folks like you, both in Banana and Gap and Old Navy. I'll be happy to drive you to those stores too.
Yes. Okay. So look, you and I both have these fancy backdrops that hopefully the viewers can see. We know that you're going to be going to the Global CDO Exchange, and you'll be discussing topics of building and managing global AI and automation COE, right? And I'd like you to discuss briefly some of the lessons you've learned along the way that you think that you're going to share at that event.
Yeah, so I won't let the cat out of the bag too much because I want to retain interest for the meeting as well, which I'm super excited. But I think from my standpoint, the biggest lesson learned has been, and I go back to that famous McKinsey study that really resonated with me, where the biggest lesson is it's easy to do a lot of POCs, but it's really, really difficult to scale. It's difficult to go into a production mindset. And I think about it a little bit like, I call it the artisan model. It's a little bit like how a painter paints a painting, like painting a Picasso. You can produce a great painting, but it's really difficult to do that at scale with the kind of velocity that modern businesses need. And I think those have been some of the biggest challenges. And I think we're certainly not at a point where we've solved every single problem, but I think in my role in our team, we've made some tremendous progress and learned a lot of lessons on the way that I think probably will be really useful to share with the others and also engage some dialogue because I'm sure others have learned some valuable lessons along the way. And I think this is a challenge probably everyone's going to face. And I'm reminded of the movie Ford versus Ferrari. Those of you who've seen it, Leonard, if you remember the scene where he says that Ford produces more cars in a day than Ferrari does in a year, right? So that making that pivot is difficult.
Yeah. Was it my outfit that gave you away that I'm more gearhead than I am a fashion maven? But you were right. I did see the movie.
I think you're more fashionable than you might be giving yourself credit for, right? But Banana Republic has some great shirts you might like.
Yeah, okay, that's true. So look, in a minute, I'm going to ask you a question for you to give executives that are, creating an AI or automation COE, 3 tips to think about. But I've liked the thing that you've hovered on, and I'm curious if in your tips you evolve that. And here's the thing that I've been thinking about as you're talking. You've talked about, now that we have the volume of data, right, narrowing that down to the insights. And I think ultimately, whether you should go on this journey or you get on these journeys, if you think you're going to have an impact, right? I work for Cinity now. I've been there 20 years. Up until 3 years ago, our name was back office, and people thought of us as literally the back office. And now data is cool. It's in the front office. People say it's the new oil. Call it what you'd like, right? But it's only going to achieve that status if we prove that these efforts of gaining insights actually have an impact in the business. So as you give the tips for creating the COE, I'm curious your thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, I mean, you said it exactly right. I think taking an investment thesis is super important. And that's part of my lead-in and my teaser about, the challenges of scale. Because I think that's really, really key. If you really want it to be, people say that data is in the oil, but if you really want the oil to be flowing through the pipelines, we have to take an investment thesis. Otherwise, it'll just remain one-offs. Otherwise, it's not possible to scale. The value capture is very important. It's not about doing those flashy, cool things that you read about in the magazines. It's about driving actual bottom line dollars.
Mm-hmm. Do you measure that in your role today, in the COE that you have today?
Yeah, definitely. So that's what I meant by the investment thesis. That piece of it is very, very critical. Probably more critical than anything else.
Right. Interesting. Okay. So did you know that this event that you'll be going to is held during the Grammy weekend?
I did not, but that is super interesting. Now I know. I was not aware.
Okay. Do you have a favorite genre of music or musician that you like?
So, it's funny. I grew up equal parts from classic rock and classical music. So I love music. I enjoy as much listening to Bruce Springsteen as I enjoy listening to Tchaikovsky.
Wow. Okay. Funny you mentioned Bruce Springsteen. I'm currently sitting in Houston. I know you mentioned you're in the Bay Area, but I'm from Brooklyn. So if you're from Brooklyn,
I'm from Jersey. I'm a long-suffering New York Mets fan and a long-suffering New York Giants fan.
There you go.
If you go to any of Bruce's concerts, the boss always.
All right. So Bruce Springsteen and Billy Joel, these are the guys I grew up on.
Exactly, and he always makes a reference to the Meadowlands and the Giants. So yeah,
that's small world, right? So anyway, some people have theorized, now that data is in the spotlight, if you would, if I can say it that way, with the advent of big data and artificial intelligence, that we should have a data Grammys, right? And maybe even an award for the best sonification, right? For the CDAOs to vote on when we're out there. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, if you've seen any of those kind of things yet.
Yeah, so I have a bit of a contrarian point of view, to be honest, Leonard. So I actually think we shouldn't do that. And the reason I say that is, again, I think part of the reason why it has been difficult to scale analytics and we are not in the factory model is, to be blunt, we have rewarded individual heroism rather than process-driven change. And that's why I have a little bit of a contrarian point of view. I think if really data and analytics has to become the engine of growth for running the business in the future, we have to pivot the mindset. This has to be the way we do things every day. It has to be about democratization. It has to be about everyone doing this. It's like using computers. You don't reward someone for being the best computer user in your office.
Yeah. So you're begging me to ask one more question, even though I went through the list that we had shared earlier, which is, do you think this is an American company phenomenon? Because like Americans love lists and they love heroes and they love winners. And, if I look across, you were talking a little bit about your global role. Is this an American phenomenon or do you think it's a human phenomenon?
I think it's a human phenomenon.
Okay.
And I say that for two reasons. So again, as the head of data science, I'm paid to be empirical and data driven in my opinions, right? So if you look across the board, I talk to a lot of people, business partners, my peers, vendors, and it's not like this situation is different in industries in any other country, right? The problem of scale is across the board. Again, I think if memory serves me right, that McKinsey study is a global study. So the empirical data points to this not being a US specific problem. I think the other piece of it is it's not so much about just things like lists and such. I think the challenge is that when any new technology comes to be, it becomes the domain of the few, right? Like I remember, years back. Again, I'm going to date myself. When I was growing up in India and I went to engineering school, pretty much you started using computers to do stuff if you went to engineering school, right? And I mean, clearly it's not the case today, right? So that's the point. Early on, that's what happens. And people are still in the mindset that you have to go to someone in a central analytics team to get data and analyses to do your day job. The pivot will be when everyone uses it in their day job the way they use Excel and computers.
You and I are roughly the same age and from the same region of the world, right? So we saw the maturity of the IT professional. Let's be honest, right? Like when IT started, right, in the late 70s, maybe early 80s, really to gain momentum, inside of large corporations, things like, engineering and accounting and law, they had a long history. And we had a good operational definition of what a professional would know, right? And then when you saw IT come, right, it was really broken, right? You took anybody and made them a project manager. It was very bifurcated. Some guys had tech skills, some guy had process skills, and really, some guys had management skills. You need all those things to be a good IT professional, but it was too new, right? Do you think now data will go through that same maturity process?
Yeah, definitely. I think so, definitely, for sure. And that was the point. You said it very well, and I think that was the point I was trying to make, where the roles will change across functions. In fact, one of the things I did at Gap Inc. was recently I laid out to the CEO and her senior leadership team what I'm proposing as the AI vision for the company for the next few years. And one of the tenets of that is like, back in the day, there was a time, I started my career in automobile manufacturing. And what we used to say was, if you want to build better quality cars, don't make it the problem of the quality assurance department. It's got to be everything. So it's a little bit like that. If you want, and that's what I said in our AI vision, I said, if we truly want our company to be data driven, and if we want to be, an analytics and AI centric company, which we do, this has to be everyone's job, not just of those people that have data in their titles.
Yeah, that's well said, right? I mean, really, we're all in business, right? That really should be front line, and we're all at Synity. We preach that. We're supporting cast, right, to do good business by doing data well, right? Yeah. Hey, listen, thank you, Vimal, very much for joining me today. Thank you, guests that are listening, and please visit cdomagazine.tech for additional interviews. And we'll talk to you again soon.
Yeah, thank you. Great talking to you. All the best.